Can a cabinet be designed differently? That's the question I asked myself when making this nightstand, and it completely changed how the piece came together. With this design, I challenged myself to rethink the geometry of cabinetry as a unified whole rather than as a set of parts. You see, traditional cabinetry essentially works as a box within a box, be it a system of drawers or compartments. They usually sit within an external shell, connected with additional hardware. So with this piece, I aim to flip this standard and use geometry to turn a box into something else. So how exactly can I do that? Well, my first idea was to use the concept of an interlocking geometry to create a mechanism for a set of drawers. This might be a bit abstract, but it gets clearer. This is the idea, a positive and a negative. Think of this as a sliding mechanism. It's the three-dimensional form of the parts that creates a mechanical system. So I tried to scale up this simple idea, but the more I did so, the more I realized that the idea breaks down once you add a drawer into the equation. It basically still functions as a box within a slightly more interesting box. However, this first sketch does succeed at one thing. It doesn't use traditional slide hardware. Instead of asking how the interlocking system could accommodate some drawers, I asked myself, how can the drawers themselves be the interlocking system? If I can create a negative in the drawer where I would normally have a drawer slide, I can then incorporate the positive of that into the external shell. This concept of addition in one part to create a subtraction in another has a term in 3D design called Booleaning. This logic functions as the basis for my design language for creating what I'm calling system drawer construction. I've picked Sapele as the wood for the drawers as they will form a large part of the overall design. I really like using darker shades of wood for custom furniture as it just has a more timeless quality. Think G-plan or mid-century modern. For the drawer sides, I added some rabbet joints to create more solidity in the glue up. Because I'm taking out a fair chunk of the side panels, I was worried the strength might suffer, so incorporating some joinery will help with the integrity of the connections. There were a lot of parts to get through, but working systematically, I slowly managed to get these all made. With the main components on the go, I can then turn to the details. The first of which are the drawer handles. I thought it would be a good excuse to use my CNC machine to make these. When you're in bed, you don't always approach a drawer straight on, so I tried to incorporate a decent sized finger pull, and for it to be wide enough that you could grab it at any point and from any angle. So I played around with a lot of options in 3D. In the end, I gravitated towards these two. Which version do you prefer? Let me know in the comments and I'll make whichever one gets more votes. That is, so long as you vote for this one, because that's the one I made. Viewers of this channel will know that I recently got a desktop CNC in the workshop. It's the Genmitsu 3030 Prova from Sainsmart. If you're interested in this model, I'll leave a link to my full review down below. This year also marks Sainsmart's 15th anniversary, which honestly feels fitting considering how much desktop CNCs have opened up creative workflows for independent makers and small workshops over the years. For me personally, it's been really fun finding ways to merge that precision with more traditional woodworking. This video isn't sponsored in any way, but SaneSmart have been a great supporter of the channel, so congratulations SaneSmart and happy birthday. With the handles carved, I cut them out at the table saw. So now I could finally assemble all the drawer parts. There were a lot of pieces coming together which relied on each other for structural rigidity, so I glued this up in parts, ensuring each joint was as square and strong as possible. This was a really satisfying part of the build as the pieces started to become three-dimensional and the interesting voids and negatives I had designed started to appear. I also thought to incorporate a late addition of a small secondary sliding tray within the top drawer, giving just a little more storage. Now, as you may have noticed, I made everything a bit oversized, which is usually a good idea. It just meant in this case I needed to trim everything down at the end, resulting in some pretty hairy cuts like this one. But anyway, with the drawers pretty much done, I needed to think of the inverse system to house them. So, having the geometry speak to the function of the piece, I figured it would be a shame to then conceal this move with an outer shell. So what if the outer shell is not a shell at all, but more like an open frame from which the drawers are subtracted? Picking maple as a contrasting wood, I cut up pieces to form the side leg assemblies. I gave a round over on the pieces that would become the legs. With everything cut to length, I then cut out some half laps. Using half lap joints meant I could ensure the connections are really strong, as some of these stretchers will also essentially act as both the slides and the overall supporting structure. They would need to take the brunt of the load from the drawers. This is the part that makes you question the whole idea. I didn't factor in the amount of rotational movement the drawer would make when opened. There was nothing to lock this motion into a straight line. As I tried moving the drawers, I couldn't help but think there's probably a good reason people usually use hardware for the slides. But to do so would defeat the purpose of this build, so for now this has to stay as it is. I was really lucky that these boards had a bit of grain to them. I think it might be some minor sporting. Whatever it is, I'm always excited to see imperfections like grain or knots, as it makes each piece unique and more personal somehow. picked a good grain direction for the pieces and moved on to the glue up. I tried to clamp this in a way that ensured a flat panel, but wood always has other ideas. In any case, I ran this through my thicknesser, so there was no doubt that the panel would be flat. As I was building this, it made me think how a bedside table is a unique piece of furniture, in that you don't always use it when you're fully awake. Sometimes you're reaching for it in the dark, half asleep. So when finishing the design, I asked myself, how could I create small details that allow the table to be used intuitively? So I wanted to carve in a custom element out of a number of 3D milled parts. These parts will become an articulating phone charger and stand. It's designed so that it can pivot to any direction for easy viewing from the bed. So it was back to the CNC to carve these out. By the way, thank you for all the support on my latest CNC review video, and for everyone who asked for a tutorial about extracting G-code and setting up toolpaths for CNC-ing, rest assured I am working on it for an upcoming video. The CNC really makes light work of these parts. They all need to be really accurate so that they can all slot together within really tight tolerances. The 3030 Prover can mill to an accuracy of plus minus 0.05 millimeters, so these of course came out perfectly. Once the roughing pass is done, I usually follow with a finishing pass. This not only smooths out the geometry but also cleans up all the burring from the upcut milling bit. It's really amazing to me to see something so intricate, something that could almost be designed by Apple, to be made out of a natural material like wood. And that's the benefit of CNCing over, say, 3D printing. You end up with something with the accuracy of a digital workflow, but in a real-world material like wood or metal, not just a one-use plastic. I sanded these down and could now turn my attention into carving the mating recess into the tabletop to receive these parts. This was kind of nerve-wracking to make sure this cut was perfectly set up. I only had one chance at this, as any mistake and the whole top would be ruined. This is where the accuracy and dependability of the 3030 Prover really shone through. In fact, I just let it get on with its job. Having good tools like this at your disposal always inspires confidence. With all the parts done, I was heading towards the final assembly. Coming back to the issue of the drawers movement, I decided that the best option was to cut out the small recess into the stretchers to form a sort of track for the drawer to slide along. I definitely didn't like cutting into finished parts like this, but I concluded this was the best solution that would maintain the overall concept and look of the piece. What's interesting here though is that small changes don't just fix one thing. As I adjusted and refined the connection with the tabletop and the lower stretcher, it affected the drawer feel, the gap, the spacing. and the structure all at the same time. The overall piece just became better calibrated as I began to complete it. That's when the geometry itself solves the problem for you, and the end result was a rather satisfying clunk. Then it's just a few final touches like this round over to the handle ends, and then I can move on to finishing. I'm finishing the piece with Danish oil, which has become my go-to for furniture. I really love the way the finished wood feels to the touch. It brings out the grain of the Sapele brilliantly too. After that, I just needed to finalize the joinery of the leg assembly by trimming down the half laps, and then could add the finish to that too. I even added some wax to the stretchers to ensure a smooth sliding motion. And with that, the cabinet was complete. So this was a bit of an experiment. Did I succeed? In some ways, yes. The end result isn't something completely alien as I might have expected at the beginning. It's only when you look at the finer details you get an understanding of the subtleties of the gesture and the geometry of the piece, and how the different parts interrelate to one another. So yeah, in the end the overall effect may be subtle, but the success lies in reframing my mindset differently in how I approach joinery and design. And then again, reinvention isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's a cumulative effort that builds into something more meaningful.